Thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar. We're going to be talking everything about building your financial foundation at the peak of your career. My name is Emma. I will be your host for today. And I would like to now introduce Michael Lanteri, the founder and managing director of Lanteri Partners. Michael, thank you for joining us and offering your time for this session today.
Pleasure.
So in today's session, we're going to be covering a lot of topics. And we're going to be kind of getting into it around, what does the landscape look like at the moment? How do people's age and performance of their career weigh into it? Do you have any opening remarks and comments around how to build a robust financial foundation? And, what are some of the kind of key points we're going to be covering, just so people know what we're going to be getting into?
Some of the key points would always be that the financial plan is always the journey. It's the concrete, it's the platform. Assets are part of the journey. I also think asset diversification is pretty important. Tax planning is essential, and the use of leverage to build an increase in your balance sheet is a must.
Awesome. We'll be covering all those topics, so let's dive into it. So to start, I want to address the topic of this webinar is around, looking at those in the peak of their career, which isn't necessarily due to age. So you could be at the prime of your career, but not because of the years that you've worked. And I'm a big believer in the decisions that you make now will sculpt your future. So what are you seeing in the market at the moment, Michael? And is financial security even possible?
Well, it's interesting, your opening remarks are fairly important, and it hasn't changed because when your day comes to leave your employment, having worked all your life or looked after your family, you don't want to retire poor. You want to actually enjoy the balance of your life and travel and do all those things. So the reality is you might have been a successful CEO. It doesn't mean you're going to be financially adapt. But the things I see at this point in time, obviously, like you read in the papers, is interest rates, and they're affecting people. They affect their cash flow, disposable income, and they affect their ability to actually build their balance sheet. It is still possible to build a balance sheet, you just got to start. And it's all about savings. And savings, I would probably talk about younger generation people. Always remember with savings, it's not going to be your first house. There are many homes in between, but I've seen people that rather than buy their second house up front, they bought their fourth house up front. They got settled with a really large non-deductible debt. So if you're paying 6%, it's costing you 12, and it's not until 15 years pass that you can look after them. So all of their savings are lost. After that, I can tell you they'll be downsizing their home. Many Australians will face that. I think you'll find that in all my years of experience, that people build wealth in a short period of time, not a long period of time. And for all the people that we've looked after, that's what's happened to them. They've been introduced to us. We're obviously a multifaceted firm. Obviously, we look after funds, portfolio management, property, financial planning, tax and accounting. But all those things are a means to an end. And in the end, once we get a person started on a little journey called financial future, they actually get off at the end. But the question is, you've got to start somewhere.
It's a really, really interesting and powerful comment that it's not about the longevity, it is about starting. And it is about just making those steps forward and having those considerations for their circumstances. So I'd like to delve into that a little deeper. And actually our first topic for today is going to be around the balance between being cash rich and asset rich. What are your comments there?
Well, that's a very interesting question that you've asked me. Some people, for example, appear to be, rich with assets. And that's a good thing long term when someone wants to retire. And some people are rich because they've got lots of cash. So here's a little example. Cash rich means you are able to buy quite a number of assets. And I will explain later that even buying a property with all the tax positions, it might cost you, in today's interest rate environment, $700 after tax. So that means if you could save in your life, even, you know, $15,000 or $1,000, you know you can already do 2 properties and also an investment portfolio. So the key drivers in life are cash flow creates empires, which creates assets. So the two are really connected, I'd say. So cash flow gives you assets, and when you retire, it's time to look at those assets and what fits and what doesn't.
Yeah. Could you provide maybe a scenario? Are there some numbers that you could take us through to, you know, demonstrate perhaps, you know, what that could look like month on month, or you know, when you can get the benefits from, you know, having those types of investment properties? Are there any examples that you can share that maybe some of your clients have gone through recently?
Well, here's an example. You know, most Aussies are pretty conservative, so they've got a love affair with property, and still do. And of course, they've got shares and super. But when you look at property, for example, you have to always remember, you know, people are prepared to borrow on a property because the bank's not going to ring you up if it's gone down in that particular year. But I always say to people, for example, when interest rates were low, I could have demonstrated with tax techniques that you could have borrowed all the money, and funny enough, it was break even. It wasn't costing you anything. But probably today it's costing you about probably $700 per month after tax. So if you figure it out, if I can afford that, I can afford to buy that property. And if I can afford 2 times 700, I can afford a second property. So interesting enough, it all comes down to using tax and using your cash flow to build assets. And of course, if you do that, you'll be surprised, your tax will go down and your balance sheet will go up, because my mother's 94 always taught me, son, you know, do you want to pay interest and build assets, or do you want to pay tax and have no assets? That tells you I'd rather use my tax to build assets. And that's what people have been doing, and that's how we work here.
Yes. So reducing their tax liabilities, and is part of that negative gearing, is that, you know,
it is. Here's a simple example. If a person has a home loan that's costing him 6%, really that's 6% after tax, so it's probably grossed up, it's costing him 12. If I bought an asset for my investments, be it shares or, you know, be it property, that 6% is deductible. So the effective rate for me could be 3%. So 3%, you know, versus 12, it's a big difference in life.
Yeah, huge.
So those little techniques help people to increase their balance sheet at a faster rate.
Yep. Awesome advice. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay. So now we're going to go on to our next topic around mapping investments for your retirement goals. So what are the considerations for those that want to build a strong financial foundation, kind of post finishing work, retiring, whatever stage of life you want to call that? So for those that are thinking about that, you know, what would your advice be around, you know, mapping your investments now to those long-term goals, and what are the considerations for those different age demographics?
All right, well, that's a very good point, because it depends on age and where you are in life. So, you know, risk and return is critical to how you look at an investment. And in particular, cash flow and savings. Can you save? That's the first thing. That's the concrete. Diversity in assets is important because, you know, except for 1 or 2 years, property and shares have different, you know, timelines. A property may go up once or twice every 10 years. A share could go up every year and go down at the same time. So I always believe that if people have diversified assets, which means they've got their shares, their super, and they've got their property, the important thing is whatever's going up at the time, they're not going to miss out. It's either one or the other. And that's what you're supposed to do. And as you get older, of course, people want to reduce their debt, principally because they want to be financially strong. But, you know, I'm going to talk later that Australia has still today the third best retirement system in the world. And it's a perfect tax haven. It's called superannuation, which I'm happy to talk about at a later point. So as you get older, you know, people always say, Michael, but you know, I want 100 grand income net in my pocket after helping all my kids, and I want to enjoy my life. So that's the time to look at assets and where they belong.
Yeah. Awesome advice. Okay, so then moving on now, I would like to touch on superannuation. I think now's a good time to talk about, you know, how to utilize those contributions and, you know, buying within super versus buying without and the restrictions that you have there, because we know people want flexibility. And we know that, you know, there are a lot of variables in life, especially if you're starting now in maybe, you know, perhaps your 30s or your 40s, you know, 60 is a fair way off. So, you know, what is your advice around investing in your super and kind of balancing that flexibility with, you know, where is the best way, what's the best method to invest?
Well, I'm going to give you an alternative view to what's promulgated out in the marketplace. If you're a young person and you speak to them and they've got children or a mortgage, they don't really care about super because, you know, it's a long time off. It's you've got to be 60 to touch your super fund. So they can't see that. So I always tell them, look, you know, we can actually develop a share portfolio outside of super on exactly the same asset allocation terms. And it's highly flexible. You can use it if something happens in life, you need the money, it's liquid, you need to help children out, no matter what. But if there's something left over, at the end of the day, there are certain tax rules that actually allow you to place all that money back into super at a very, very fast rate. Because what people believe is, Michael, you're going to teach me two things. There's no tax in my super when I retire. No matter what I take out, there's no tax. So yes. And so often we have young people that are using their share portfolios, you know, outside super. And there's something left, and then towards the end, we start to drip it into super because they know that's the ultimate tax haven. Now, of course, if you're older, people are reverse. They'll say, look, Michael, I've got all these assets, but where am I? And so the moral of the story is if each person can have 1.9 million in super in a tax-free zone, their aim is to get everything into their fund in a tax-free zone because nothing beats tax-free. So it depends on age, but you can actually give people the flexibility in their life.
Yeah. Very interesting point. Thank you for that.
Pleasure.
I think it would be now wise to talk about the alternatives to superannuation, and that being self-managed super funds. And when we caught up a couple of weeks ago, we wanted to include this as part of this webinar because you said that there's one that accountants don't tell you about, and that you've worked out a strategy for your clients to, you know, really increase their returns. So can you break down, you know, what is the strategy here, and, you know, why do people turn to maybe a self-managed super fund, and then what are the alternatives to that?
Well, it's interesting that I read a survey recently that most young people now have self-managed super funds. And the reason why they have it is because they like to have personal choice in the selection of their assets. So the way it works, a self-managed super fund has got a deed. You've got to have an accountant doing your financials. Of course, we do it. You've got to have an auditor. So, of course, they are excess fees. Now, if a person, for example, has got $1 million in that fund, you know, even if they're earning 6%, you know, you're going to earn a lot more money than someone, you know, who's got a lot less. And so the greater the value of the asset versus the rate of return, the greater your rate of return will be. So people have to take into account, after my accounting and fees, etc., what's my net position? Now, you have young people that at the moment, you know, have to be thrifty and costs are really important to them. You can still have a self-managed super fund without the accounting. There are structures set up to achieve that so that people can save the accounting, the audit fees, and we still have the same asset allocation. But, you know, people say to me, but Michael, you know, I can't have my wife's and my money in one pot of gold, because it's not a self-made super fund per se. So yes, you're right, they've got to be individual. But look what we do. So once we had a couple, and I remember, say for example, he had about 400 and she had about 400. And she asked me, so Michael, why is my husband, 2% more than me? And I said, well, you haven't got a self-made super fund with the deed and the accounting fees. It's really cheap to run. But what we did, we gave him all the growth assets and we gave you the conservative assets. When we combine the two, the rate of return's the same and you minimise your costs. And that was it. She was really happy.
Wow, I bet she was.
Yeah, she was.
Oh, that's terrific. So what are some of the, I guess, the other benefits from, looking at having a self-managed super fund? If you had to give people advice around, for their scenario, I know it's, scenario dependent and individual dependent, but a superannuation fund versus a self-managed superannuation fund, or strategies to replicate it, how do they make those decisions? And does that, again, impact, their, decisions if they're earlier on in their career or later in their career? What would you say, and families as well, if they've got kids, how do they make these decisions? Apart from obviously coming to Lanteri to help.
Sorry about that. I think for people, once they work out, and I teach them, for example, you can have 1.9 million per person in a super fund. And when you retire, there's no tax on the earnings, no capital gains tax, there's no tax on what money you take out. And you have two people, 2 times 1.9 is a lot of money. People get excited because nothing beats tax-free. But the reality is that you always work out the net of fees. So there's no real difference if you have, dare I say, a firm like us that knows how to set up 2 asset allocations between 2 partners and save costs. The result will be the same.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Good advice yet again. Okay, we're going to move on to a different topic, a bit of a change of pace. We are going to cover off private school fees for all the parents who may be joining us. So we have talked about this a little bit, and you have a strategy to reduce the cost of school fees, to free up that cash to then help, build longer term investment plans. What are your recommendations?
Okay, well, with parents, this is a very emotional position to take, because they all want to look after their children. I haven't seen anyone who doesn't. It can be a really big cash flow drain. And some people, you'll be surprised, will tell you that in most private schools, the parents really can't afford the school fees. They just do it. And they probably end up downsizing their home to retire as a result. But I always say to people, you have choices in life. So here's an example. Today, if people do a year 11, year 12, it's going to be in a private school, 45,000 each today. You've got 2 kids, it's 90,000. That's a lot. That's after tax. You've got 180. Now, try to switch that from prep. Now, if I gave you the figures from prep onwards, each child is going to cost you at least 650,000 after tax. Okay. Does it mean that this child will get a better education? Not so. I think a survey revealed that most failures in first year uni are private school children. So let's work on the reverse position, okay? Here's an example, and I adopted this position with my children who have grown up, of course. So if they went to a local public school, if it was a great school with a good reputation, they'll always ask you, I've checked out the principal, he or she is really good, Michael. I always tell them, give them Kumon. Why? Okay. My kids did it because Kumon teaches them goal setting. I'm going for my gold, I'm going for my, purple, It also teaches them maths and English. It teaches them over time to be obviously alert and to do it fast. And, you know, in the old days, it was called rote learning. You never had to think. Today, you've got to think. And I believe that English and maths are crucial to primary school children. I was speaking to my cousin the other day, and her daughter's a teacher in a school, in a public school, and I was amazed. She said her daughter said that one of the students couldn't read in grade 6. And I said, well, how did that person get there? Like, did someone look after that person? Oh, they just kept bumping that person up. I said, oh, I'm a bit shocked by that. So QMon, it doesn't cost much, probably a couple of $1,000. And believe you me, when you speak to all the parents that I've recommended it to, they all say the same, Michael, it's fantastic. And sometimes what happens when a child is behind in their schooling, QMon does a little test, and their actual mantra is to get that child up to the certain level they're supposed to be on. So here's an example. Public school is free if it's a good school. I add to QMon, okay, well, it could be 3 or 4 grand. I do it for about 7 years. I've spent probably 30,000, okay? What if I gave them a tutor from year 7 to year 12? In maybe one of the probably subjects they're not that good at, or 2, it could cost me 10,000. Okay, it's 70 grand and 40. It's 110,000 I've spent. Okay, better than 650. Or some people go to, you know, Catholic or Anglican school, which is subsidised by the government. That's fine, you know, because the average cost up to year 7 is probably going to be about 70,000. I'm going to get a particular, you know, tutor from year 7. It's a 70,000. And I worked it out, I spent 140. That's better than 650. Now, believe you me, private school children in year 11 and 12, they have a tutor to get their marks up. So, can you say that that child in private school had a better education than someone who had QMon and private tutoring and a good school? I doubt it. I doubt it very much so. But some people, for example, no matter what you tell them, and that's a small population, they'll always spend the 45,000, and honestly, when they retire, they're poor. That's okay, and they'll downsize their home. So what I'm telling you, here's choice.
Yes, look, it's such great advice, and like you mentioned, there's the option of, you know, professional tutoring such as QMon. There's a lot of franchises around, but if they can't access that or would prefer, you know, one-on-one tutoring, that is also a huge difference. And when we spoke, you also made the comment about, you know, utilising that money that's been saved and then helping them buy the first house or helping them, you know, kickstart some of their investments, which I just absolutely loved.
Well, that's true, because other than helping, obviously, their uni and the uni fees, which is an extraordinary amount of money, the children, I've always said, will be a nation of renters without mum and dad bank. And I promoted that for 20 years. People weren't keen, but now you watch auctions, parents are fairly aggressive at auctions. So how to build a deposit for a child without paying for it. So today, if a child bought something worth 650 or 700,000, and you thought, oh, I should be able to save $250,000, which is, let's say, 1/3 after costs. $250,000 after tax is like a lot of money, because it's 500,000. If the child's 5 and I index it up by, I don't know, the age of reason is 27, let's say 22 years, even average rate of the property gain was 6%. That's a hell of a lot of money, because, you know, at the end of the day, that asset that I wanted to buy for this child was 700,000. Well, it's going to be 1.4 million at the end of the day. You know, that's an impossible task after tax. So here's what I've always promoted, and it works. It works. Definitely works. And I've used it, and all the parents use it. I would have bought a really, really good property, really good property. I did not buy it so the child can live in it. I bought it because it's going to make money in an area where the demographics is changing. Such as, in the old days, I bought Richmond, which now I know about, and today it's like very expensive. And so if I would have spent, for example, 700,000, when I go through all my tax positions, it's going to cost me either break even or $500, per month. I'd say to a parent, can you afford $500 per month per child? And they say, well, of course, Michael. Okay, well, the tax department's going to pay for it. And they can't believe it. So if you index up, this property of 700 grand, for about 22 years, even at 6%, surprise, surprise, it's going to double. There's no doubt, or triple. But the way Melbourne's going, Sydney's worse.
Yes.
At least 1.4, 1.5 million, right?
It is.
So
Absolutely.
if I bring that 1.4 million or 1.5 down in today's dollars, then divide by 3, it's going to be, somewhere around 300,000. Well, Michael, that's what I needed as a deposit for my child. I didn't pay for it, Michael. There's no way I can afford 3 million, grossed up for 2 kids, but I can do that. I said, great. Now, they're not going to live in it. They can go to London, like my child's going back to London. That's fine. But you have built a deposit for them using tax and property, which the government wants you to do anyway. And they say, Michael, that's for me.
I love that. Just hearing these strategies and hearing you make it sound so easy. And I love that, some of the different kind of topics we've covered with self-managed super funds and these school fees isn't something that you just hear every day. So keep it coming. We're just over halfway. So we're going to cover off next, consolidating asset investments. Now, this is important because, when people are planning for retirement, they want to think about what income do I need at retirement? And that is an age-old question of how long am I going to live and how much am I going to need and what is my lifestyle? So how do you help people determine how long that's going to last and make sure that they can do all the things they want to do and help their children where they can too?
All right, well, I'm going to tell people, please don't believe what people bring in the paper. Oh, 50,000 is what I want to retire on, and you can live on 50,000. That is simply not true. And I do not know who they've interviewed. They certainly have interviewed the general public or our clients. If you talk to people intimately, they would tell you, look, I've paid for school fees, Michael, we've done it. And before, our life passes, we will enjoy our life. So I asked them, 35,000 is to live, there's food. Do you want to go overseas every year, every second year? They tell me yes. Look, Michael, I want to have good hotels. I want to spend money because we deserve it. We work so hard. I've got to tell you, it always comes to 80 to 100,000 net. And when I work it out for them, they're always shocked. And they say one thing, that's what I want, Michael. So, therefore, what these retirees are chasing is income. And if they've got assets, it's time to convert the actual balance sheet to convert it back into income. So here's, for example, if I had properties, say I had 2 properties, for example, and I've done well, and I just kept them, but they've been great long-term, capital gains positions, and if I work out my numbers, on my return, because obviously today the rent's around 4%, I end up after outgoings, land tax, corporate fees, maintenance, all these things, I could end up, after tax, remember they're taxable, either 62 or 52,000. Now, of course, that's not even close to 100,000, right?
So
once I teach them, for example, how we can fast track putting money into super to retire well, I'll say to them, well, these assets you've had during your youth are a means to an end now. You are a different person. You want 100 grand, you're a retiree. So we've sold the assets, you know, paid the capital gains tax and all that sort of thing. But if I had that same money in a super fund at 1.9 million, for example, it's going to be 114 grand, but it's kind of like tax-free. And guess what? If all I want is 100,000, well, you can't spend the money. So I tell people, spend more, enjoy your life. And the missing link is the tax, you see. You don't pay tax. That's why it's still the third best retirement system in the world. So when you're older, you want income. When you're younger, you want assets. And that's the key.
Great. Hope everyone's written that down. Well, the next part of that would be around, personalizing these asset and investment strategies. So when we're talking about their life choices, and, just trying to find out, I guess, like a real rate of return. So what would you recommend around, that personalization of investment strategies? We've talked about, in retirement versus, in preparation for. But how do you get deep into, what is your process? Can you share a little bit about, the fact find process and what you do with your clients and why it's different? Because there's a lot of people out there providing advice, and there's lots of different quizzes and surveys to figure out, what is that lifestyle that I want? So how do you personalize that for them?
Well, a lot of people talk about, their desires. And I always say to people, when you're talking to people, it's a very emotional discussion, because part of their life is an emotional balance sheet, and part of their life is a long-term security and financial balance sheet. And I've always said to people that unless we fix the emotional one, say, for example, your second home, we're never going to fix your financial one. So when you talk to people, you've got to actually work out what is their emotional one first, because that's the one they tend to go first when they're older. They tend to work out, so Michael, now we want to be independent. So I always work out that first and how to work out the balance. And so there are many young people that are striving for their second home. And I would tell them, for example, at this point in time in your life, those bonuses, etc., what I want you to do is put them all into your home loan, all into your home loan. And once your home loan's down to a certain level, don't worry, the bank will like you. We'll be able to move to the next home, but still have some money left over for savings for your investments. So you've got to be able to talk to people about their children, about their lifestyle, what they want to do with their money, where they want to end up. Those things are integral. And when you talk to people about their financial plan, which is their journey, you have to know who they are. And of course, they always ask you about investments. And I always teach them, now look, investments hang off the financial plan. That is the journey, okay? But some people say shares are better than property. I don't believe in that. Our clients have got shares, they've got super funds, and they've got property, because it's diversified. If you look at shares or super funds, every 7 years they go down by 2 years, and they probably average about 5, 6, maybe 7. Property is no different. There are down years of property, except for Sydney. It just keeps going up. So I always believe if you look at all the numbers where they end up the same. Some people try to trick you and tell you, oh yeah, shares are better or property's better. Not really, depends on where they take the time cycle, you see. So I always believe that I want to diversify myself to capture at least one time cycle all the time. And I believe that that is the correct strategy. Don't be biased. As long as we buy good assets,
Yes.
Not a bargain, because bargains don't come home, we're going to make it in life.
And do you think people know the actual real rate of return of their investment portfolios?
No, I see people all the time, and they show me, and I say to people, oh my God, all these funds, all these assets, but I can't see the rate of return here. I can't see it. I can't work it out. With us, our back office is high tech, and nobody can change it. It tells you even every quarter the rate of return net of fees. You cannot change it. And I like that because it's transparency. In a property, you can kind of work it out on valuations, and after you deduct obviously fees for holding it, it's a longer process, but you can do it still. So I always believe calculate your net position. It can be done to understand where your journey is going to end up. And sometimes I say I've met people that have bought some assets, and honestly, the assets are not good. And I'll say to them, well, how long do you want to keep this not good asset in your life till you retire? They say, well, no, Michael, it doesn't get me to retirement. I said, sometimes in life it's good to own up and say, this is about investment. Okay, well, we've now bought a better investment, which will make up for the losses on this one long term. So, you know, you can't be pragmatic. You've got to be active about looking after yourself.
Yes, and your family as well.
Well, family's the most important thing in people's lives. Creating security is the key. But cash flow also creates security.
Very interesting indeed. Such great points. Thank you for sharing.
Pleasure.
So we had about 40 minutes to cover some content here today, and you know, I hope that everyone's taken some really great tips away to apply, you know, to their scenario. Michael, just before we move to a Q&A, because I know speaking to some people before registering that I think there are going to be some questions for you, so sit tight for that. But before we jump to that, I would like to try and kind of close out, you know, some of the topics that we discussed today, and, you know, just mentioning how, you know, cash flow is such a big part of your financial plan and how to achieve that financial foundation. So do you have any other kind of closing comments of, you know, what does that process look like, and what's really important as those considerations?
When we are talking to people in relation to their fact find to prepare this financial plan and journey, and after you ascertain all the things that they want in life, particularly looking after their family and security, you know, there is a way of finding out, for example, what's left over, the savings. And that's a journey in itself. You've got to drill down into people's lives. But once you find that, that's the missing link. Once you find what they can save without affecting their lifestyle, that's the formula that builds assets. And I spend a lot of time looking for that formula. Yeah,
that's terrific. Well, thank you for sharing. We're going to sit tight and wait for a couple of questions to come in. I've got one to just get us started. Michael, when you were talking, I just want to touch on a little bit about property, because, you know, you have mentioned, you know, the rates to buy in Sydney, and it's another service that Lanteri provides for their customers around purchasing properties. What are your recommendations at the moment as to where to buy and what to buy? And, you know, how does that play in for those, you know, building their you know, portfolio of potentially properties and their investment plan? You know, do you have any kind of top level advice of buying in the market at the moment?
Well, I do, because I was always taught whatever's dear today is cheap tomorrow. And when people look back, even they bought their home, and they look back and say, oh my God, you know, we're 60, lucky we bought that home then, and that we thought was dear, we were fortunate. And the way our building costs are going, particularly in Melbourne, it's going to be a problem for people. So never fear. We don't procrastinate. We've got to move forward, otherwise you're going backwards. And so I always tell people that, you know, if we adopt that position when we move forward, you know, provided we select the right property. The right property is all about demographics. For example, I had demographic stats which tell me religion, schools, age groups, who's moving in there, and what they earn. And that matters to me, because all those things are a driver of property. You know, Richmond was a place not liked by many 25 years ago. Fitzroy was a terrible place. Yeah, well, Fitzroy's going up faster than Toorak. and it has been for some time, because powerful millennials, they want to have entertainment, they want to spend their money, they want restaurants, they want all those things that, you know, that they want to enjoy. So if you look for those demographics, if you look for a change that's occurring in that suburb, follow the people, you will follow the rate of return.
Awesome. We've got 2 more questions, so we'll answer these and see how we go. The first one is from an attendee saying that they haven't planned for retirement yet, so they don't have a financial plan, but they want to start. So where do they start, and do you have to already have significant wealth to work with Lanteri?
We look after everybody, we're not biased, and that's been our mantra since I started this firm. Whether you've been divorced, whether you're a single mother, doesn't make a difference to us. It's where we end up that counts in life. So all the clients have started, you know, at a certain point, and they've ended up at another point, you know. And often, you know, people tell you that. Now, recently I went to a charity function, and our long-standing client took me and my wife aside, said, Michael, you know, I started as an ex, you know, I didn't have much, and look at me now, I'm retired, my wife and I are really happy. You know, so they're just normal people. So I always say to people that we look after everybody because our mission is to get you to that level. And it doesn't make a difference if you haven't started. With us, we're going to obviously drill you all about your emotions and where you want to be, and then prepare the plan, highly numeric, and take you through it. And you'll be surprised. People always ask, you know, so what do we do? And I said, I've built this firm on doing everything for people. You just have to build up your career to make more money and more bonuses. And they get it. So all the people, they'll tell you the same thing. Our job is to build the balance sheet. Okay, do the accounting and tax, of course. And their job is to build a career. So often at my stage in life, I'm giving career advice to young people or older people because, you know, life's not just about money. It's about people, always.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
The question to ask you is start. Don't procrastinate. Move forward.
Yes, and like you said, if you've got $15,000, you can buy property.
Start.
Make those changes. So it leads actually into the next question was, does Lanteri Partners cover all bases mentioned today? So tax, superannuation, super advice. Maybe if you could just list out the services that Lanteri provides for everyone on this call, because we didn't necessarily cover that. And some people are finding out about Lanteri Partners for the first time. So can you just share a little bit around the services that you offer your clients?
Certainly. When I was a young man, I actually realised people were going through so many doors, getting different advice, nothing matched, and, you know, so many advisors. So I built a practice which has tax, accounting, funds management, super, property, careers. We do everything. I think people call it a one-stop shop. And believe you me, it's been a winning point for us because even if they've got small businesses, we run lots of small businesses, provided you know the numbers before June, you can work out their bank position, you can work out their tax position, you can save them tax, and life is about having the knowledge. And the people here are very, very knowledgeable. And I think that they, judging by what I know about what clients tell me, they're enjoying the ride. Yeah,
that's important for sure. 2 more questions. The first one is, I don't live in Melbourne, currently based in Sydney. Do you work with remote clients outside of Melbourne? So
yes, we do.
Yes, you do. Yes.
We do. And in fact, we look after people not only all over Australia, but even overseas.
Well, I would hope that these plans that you're creating allow them to have these lavish European holidays, so that, you know, you can speak to them wherever they are.
I think partners like me because I always believe that if you create security for your family, it's time you enjoyed life.
Mm.
And I always push them to have a higher income in retirement, because I say to them, look, you can't spend the money. So you can go business class if you want to. Look, you can't spend it. And they say, Michael, that's great. I just need to know the number. When you give it to them, you know, I give it to them. I once went to a seminar which I was not pleased about. And it said, you can tell your client live on 60,000 and the money will last till 90. I thought, what? At 90, who really cares? If you're 60, you've got 15 good years, that's the time to spend your money and enjoy your life. Who cares at 90? Okay, but 90, you sell your home, you go in aged care, that's already mapped out. So I thought, oh, that was a weird person who said that to me. I thought, no, that's not right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a useful point to talk about, you know, that time that in your retirement, but then the time, you know, not all those years are going to be the same. So,
Great.
A couple more questions and then we will wrap up. How do I know when the right time is to seek professional advice? So I think we did cover that, is like, you know, now is the right time to start. But are there any other parameters? You know, we talked about, you know, leveraging if you are in the peak of your career and in your earning capacity, and if you have the ability to earn more and to, you know, continue to increase your income. But, you know, do you have any other advice of when is the right time to seek that professional advice?
I think that every time is the right time because, for example, if you're a young person, the fact that you've gained some knowledge over a discussion, it doesn't mean that that financial advisor can help you today because you have no savings. But that person can give you a goal to ensure you get to that level. So in a year and a half's time, they come back. So I often remember a young person came to me and the career was going pretty well. And they wanted to have this particular home. So I said to them, for the moment, I can't help you because I can't find the savings, but you've got to get your debt down. And when you do to that level, come back. And I thought it would take 3.5 years. Well, in 1.5 years, that person came back and said, look, Michael, I had all these bonuses and look, I followed your advice and here I am. And after that, he just flew with us.
That's awesome. It's really, really good to hear that. Okay, last question. And I personally do love this. And I know there's been a big shift over the last few years around this and when it comes to financial planning and wealth, but you know best. So Michael, how can someone align their values and their principles with their wealth building strategy?
For example, you know, today there's certain assets that you can align with people, certain funds that you can align with people's wishes. Even people who believe they have issues about climate change or they have issues about gambling. That can always be done. In fact, at the moment, we've got an onboard, really a minimal cost platform for young people so they can invest their money. Where all the assets are preset. It's called Medici Invest. If they want to look it up on the website, they can find it. So those things are all achievable. But I've also worked out in my life that these people who have that ideology, and we're here to actually perform that ideology, still want a rate of return. So you've got to mix and match it. Yeah,
really good advice. Well, thank you, Michael. We might wrap it up there. Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar today. Now, Michael, I do know there are a couple of books that you also wanted to recommend people to read. Do you want to just rattle those off as we close out?
Okay, so these two books, one of them is The Richest Man in Babylon, and another book is probably the 1920s. It's called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Now, these books are not books on investment. They're about an attitude of mind. So if you gave someone a marketing task and that person came back and said, you know what, there's only 25% of the market to gain. Well, someone else is going to say, oh my God, thank you. There's 25% for me to have a go at. See, it's a different type of mind. They also teach you that one man's lost opportunity is another man's gain. You know, you've got to move forward in life. Don't procrastinate, because if you procrastinate, you're never going to build a balance sheet. So what these books do, they teach you about savings in a quite a remarkable way, and they teach you about actually converting your brain into thinking about moving forward. And once you do that, you'll be surprised people are moving forward.
That's terrific. And look, everyone needs a plan. Everyone needs to start somewhere, needs to move forward. So pretty great advice in there. If they don't plan, then they're in trouble. They're not going to have that foundation set up in the future.
Well, I've always said that, you know, my ideology has always been, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. If you plan your career, and you do, because you're looking for the next position somewhere else to become the general manager or the CEO, well, that should be the same for your financial independence, because you're 60 and people say, okay, it's now time for the young person to take over. They've given you redundancy and you're gone. Well, what good is that if you're living on 50,000? I mean, it's been all for naught. So pay attention to your career, but pay attention to this plan.
Absolutely. Well, we'll leave it there on that note. Thank you very much, Michael, for your time today, and everyone that joined. We will be sending a copy of the recording over, and Lanteri will be getting in touch if you have any other questions around any of the topics that were covered, or would like to be in contact about creating and setting up your own financial plan. So thank you again, Michael.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a good day.